Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recruiter Hangout. Thank you for joining us as we meet with industry leaders and innovators who are paving the way in the recruiting space. My name is Stephanie Redmond with Viral Marketing, and I'm joined by my co-host and partner, Bill Vick. Bill has been a recruiting consultant and trainer for 30 years. He started his career at MRI, where he was named National Rookie of the Year, foreshadowing his lucrative career. Bill is a serial entrepreneur who not only started his own business, but he's also a founder and board member of the Pinnacle Society. He is currently active as a speaker on recruiting and management in the US and in the UK. In all of his spare time, Bill has studied martial arts and even got to study with Bruce Lee. How freaking cool is that?
Wow.
How do you dig those things out, Stephanie?
I'm telling you, I just find all the good stuff. That's a great fact. I feel like I would introduce myself. Hi, I'm Stephanie. I studied with Bruce Lee. Nice to meet you.
That would be my opener, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, your opener actually goes a little something like this. Our special guest today is James Chmielinski. James is a second-generation recruiting veteran and founder of Veruca.io. Veruca is the first ever recruiting innovations lab where sourcing and recruiting teams convert the best ideas into products. James' first passion was baseball, and he currently pitches for the Los Angeles baseball team. We got some talented people in the house today. Awesome. Well,
Yep.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Stephanie.
All right, Bill, why don't you kick us off today?
Well, Jim, I have to say I'm really looking forward to this because I've been kind of following you off and on in different capacities and roles now for a while, and you never cease to amaze me. There's people that are on the leading edge, and you seem to be a step or two ahead of it. And so I'm really excited to get your views on what's happening. I'd like to start off, if we can, just to kind of introduce everyone to you and some of the many, many things you've done. You've been involved in the recruiting space in a couple of different ways. You've been involved in sourcing, a software developer. You now have a very exciting company I want to talk about. But why don't you just kind of take that 20,000-foot view and just talk a little bit about Jim Chmielinski and what brought you to the party and
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It was nice to have you reach out to me, and I was honored. Obviously, you're very well respected in the industry, and certainly are paving the way for a new class of a generation within the recruiting space. And I think where I'm at now, I'm really just about trying to push the industry forward, to get people to start thinking about different ways of doing things, factoring in all the new technology. It didn't start that way. It started back as a kid, basically, growing up in a family that had a recruiting company, a boutique company. They've always been entrepreneurs in their life, different kinds of businesses, like a restaurant business, a record store in Manhattan, New York, which is where I was born. And so it was ingrained in me really young to think for yourself and to come up with ideas and try to put them into action. And so I would help while I was growing up, going to school, playing baseball, on the side, I was helping my parents support their business. So it was a traditional IT technology staffing company based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. They had a previous company with some other family members up in Toronto, Canada, before that. And I think that was a building block to this operation. And slowly but surely grew and supported them, and started off kind of like you would in any other recruiting company at the lowest level, doing support and administration. And I became a junior recruiter, and I started doing sales and business development. And then I decided I wanted to move beyond the family business and move around a little bit. At that time, I had finished college. Baseball started the writing started to get on the wall that probably wasn't going to be a long-term profession for me. And so I pivoted and moved out to Las Vegas and got involved with a company called Volt, which really taught me enterprise recruiting and staffing, went through some great trainings, had a great experience. They had an awesome culture, and started building a market specifically around technology in Las Vegas. And so that opened my eyes up. I learned a lot of things, taking a step to more enterprise staffing versus more of a boutique operation. And I just stayed interested in the industry, always being around people. I wanted to learn more. So I ended up moving out to San Francisco eventually, where I worked for a couple companies on the external side first, and then pivoted again toward internal corporate recruiting at the Gap headquarters, and was part of a program team supporting a $100 million staffing department. And that exploded ideas inside around how to innovate and build processes to cater to a much larger market, right? And I think that's when supply chain started coming into my mind about looking at how do you develop a system and create these channels of different skill sets and different talent bases and attract them to an opportunity. I think that's where I also first started thinking about candidate marketing. But I was up in San Francisco in the Bay Area, great city, for a couple years. I was having a tough time dealing with the bipolar weather there, growing up in the desert in Arizona. And so I came back to get closer to my family. Both of my parents had retired out in Las Vegas at that time. And from my first go around in Vegas, I had, built some relationships, including a company called Zappos, which really got on the map in that time period. And so I was fortunate enough to work with an awesome crew internally as a corporate recruiter at Zappos, and learned a lot about culture and a lot of innovation around ideas in recruiting. And, that right around leading up to the point of where they introduced a new way to manage people called holacracy. They also, were thinking about getting rid of job descriptions all around, which they did shortly after I left. And so again, just continuing to sort of sponge up knowledge from all these different aspects of the business. I liked playing the agency recruiter. I liked playing the corporate recruiter, working inside of VMS, supporting a client on site. And then I just started hearing a lot about things happening in Southern California. And everybody also was telling me, you need to get your butt out of these other cities. And you seem like a Southern California kind of guy. I didn't know whether to take that as a good thing or a bad thing. I took it as a good thing. And so got involved with a couple startups once I got out to Southern California. And that's where I really started learning how to build a business, how to build a software business, and was part of a company called Zephyr, which is doing very well in the YouTube analytics space. Awesome culture out there, and learned a lot of things. And then what I realized is in that whole pocket of what they call Silicon Beach out here in Southern California, a lot of recruiting technology companies were coming out. So ZipRecruiter, they bootstrapped from nothing to become a big player for a lot of non-tech staffing needs, and so they distributed out a lot of jobs, found out a cool way to aggregate and push the message out about companies. And then I got involved with a referral platform called Springroll, and that company grew, within 6 months or a year, we were generating about came out to the first $1 million just in referral technology, which was completely dependent on LinkedIn's business. But so anyway, one by one, I just kind of slowly started making the shift over more to the technology. And after, going back to the motivations around really what's driven this path is the frustration and the volatility. I think in recruiting, unfortunately, there are a lot of trends that go with economic rises and falls. And so a lot of people make a lot of money and do a lot of great business. Times going up, and then other times, you look back, you might have Y2K, or you might have, 9/11 or the downturns. And if you're a boutique company, you really get hit hard in those times. And that's not the most stable type of life for the profession of a recruiter. You scramble, there's a lot of turnover. Companies, they tend to get rid of staffing services as the first thing to go when the economy starts hitting a slump. So deep inside, I think that there's something ingrained in me to really try to create a system or help figure out a way to do this thing, to find talent, to streamline the process with technology in a way that stabilizes the industry and all of the players that exist within recruiting. And also give people a way to build a platform for themselves. I think we're guilty of bucketing our talents based off of, the success of a hire, and next week it's forgotten. And I think that there are so many different skill sets that we bring to the table that we really just don't have a way to prove our worth within those specific areas.
Jim, I want to come back and spend some time on your current project, but as I hear you speaking, hear you talking, am I safe to say that you kind of look at recruiting as what I call a binary business? Yes, no, success, fail. There's no in between.
I think that, yeah, it gets to the extremes real fast in terms of decision making. It's very black and white in that sense, for sure.
As you look at it, and I agree with that, by the way. I think it's absolutely correct. But as you think about I'm going to call it the evolving model, and you've been around this business a long time. You grew up in it. You've seen it from all different dimensions. You've been on the third-party corporate side. You've been involved in the sourcing side, the corporate side, the whole gamut, and the technology side. And you mentioned LinkedIn. Where do you see it, where it's at right now today, with all of this I'm going to call it a social media soup, all
right.
this stuff is kind of coming together.
Yep.
And different pieces are popping up and sinking and rising. Where do you see it, though, where it is today, that piece, and where do you see it going down the road? If you look over the horizon, you look around the corner, and you say to yourself, year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, what do you think it looks like today, and how will it look in your mind tomorrow?
For sure. I think that understanding where things are going and where you see the trends, and if you look at a company and the different departments, right, and you see the tools and technology and how they perform their business to a level of success, you see that a lot of companies or a lot of departments have actually started moving themselves forward in ways that recruiting hasn't. So I think you can still learn a lot just turning over and looking at another department to see what they're doing. The types of things that they're doing, revolve around automation, insights, which are really more actionable around information that you learn. So I think artificial intelligence is something that's being talked about a lot. And I feel like it's going to start with these microservices is what I think technology calls them, that you have these little apps that solve these little problems. And, each person is going to have the opportunity to understand which puzzle pieces fit together best to solve their specific problem. So there's a very independent nature about what's coming. And I think that you need to understand the full life cycle of something in order to put the best puzzle piece together. Gone are the days, I feel, of the really large platforms where you want to get everything from that one product. I think we can classify LinkedIn as a social network for business. We can classify Facebook as a social network for personal. But if you look, even within those ecosystems, they have so many different tools and apps and microservices that you can select from. So whether you choose to buy a value chain that one company owns, or whether you put together a puzzle piece of independent software that is yet to be acquired, I think that that's the trend that's going to change as far as what tools that we use to actually do the work that we're doing. Now, from a standpoint as a professional in a vocation, I think that the industry is getting extremely specialized. A recruiter is not just a recruiter. If you look at the talent acquisition lifecycle, what you have is sourcing, recruiting, hiring, and then you can actually go a layer below that in sourcing, which is outbound outreach, headhunting, follow-up, email automation, inbound content, and candidate marketing. These are all specializations within the sourcing field. Recruiting can break down into qualification or assessments and different tools to capture the relationship and build and engage that existing relationship. Hiring, employment, onboarding, that first 45, 60 days, all the different things that are coming out as making it extremely important to have that great killer impression for a new hire. And so I feel fundamentally people want to be able to vocalize and prove what they're good at within each of these specializations. And I think that more and more with the upcoming millennials that are coming on board, they are independent entrepreneurs and they want to decide what tools and what processes and what designs they use to accomplish success. I like a lot of the concepts that Lou Adler has talked about with performance-based, and the Shalleys of the world and sourcing talk about outcomes. I think that that's very true. It's not going to be about a job and your job consists of these activities. It's going to be about, we don't really care what tools or processes or designs that you put together, but here's where we need to be. And we need to be there in 10 days. We need to be there in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So it's very driven by performance.
Yeah, it is. I agree with that. One of the things you touched on, which I think is really important, is you talked about the, I'm going to call them bots for send.
Right.
And as this kind of a bot mentality takes hold in software development, as we're seeing it. And then you sit back and look at LinkedIn as it's kind of entering the recruiting space in a lot of subtle ways. They basically have replaced what used to be called Elance for gigs, the gig environment. They're pursuing that aggressively. I think you'll see them in staffing. I think you'll see them in executive recruiting as well in the short term. But as it takes place, one of the problems is the labels that we deal with, because we humans like to put things in boxes. And the word recruiter now has become fractured. I'm personally not sure what it is anymore when someone says, I'm a recruiter. Does that mean they're a full cycle recruiter? Does that mean they're a sourcer? Does that mean they're a talent manager? What does it mean? And I think we're having a problem in our industry as a whole of labeling what people really do and are in the context of the way the economy works today. It might change tomorrow, and I think it will. But today we have to deal with it. So how do you view that labeling as a construct of the way that people perform? Because people sometimes perform like they're measured many times. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the recruiting process itself, and you look at the different names that we have for what people do, what is your view of that? How's that kind of coming together?
I think the easy answer to that is you can just blame it on generational differences, right? I think that different generations call things different names, and some of it is trendy, some of it is real. I think what's really important about however you want to identify what it is that you are as a person, as a professional, or what it is that you're trying to accomplish. I think the key is to understand how do you define success, right? And I think that the previous way of thinking, I'm a success because I'm a doctor, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm this, or I'm that, right? And I think it's based off of your status around what the assumptions are of that label, right? I'm a car salesman. Well, that's a lot different than if you say, I'm a doctor, right? Or I'm a astronaut. And I think that the difference and the fundamental change and shift that's happening is it's not about what you are, it's what did you do, or what are you doing, right? And I think that I'm not an astronaut, I'm working on going to the moon or going to Mars, right? And I think that, I'm not a recruiter, I run campaigns to engage talent, right? It falls within the spectrum. So I think people are going to start identifying of what they want to accomplish versus what they identify with. That's the best way that I can see.
If you're talking about you're measuring based on skills and accomplishments, not just based on titles and backgrounds.
Exactly. And it's confusing right now. And you have this emergence of different people, trying to brand themselves, and I think that personal brand has something to do with it as well, because we have so much access to this social ecosystem online that we really have to think about how we are going to brand ourselves just as much as how a company is going to brand itself, or a movie that's developing a preview to gain a specific audience. It's an attraction game now. It's not an acquisition game.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. That's where I'm as you know, I'm a huge fan of video. I think it has an enormous play in recruiting as well as lots of businesses.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that excites me about Viral. Our co-host here is Viral is taking the opportunity to market and teach marketing and show marketing to people who like recruiters. Everyone gives lip service to marketing, but marketing really means marketing a candidate in most people's minds. It's not marketing in the classical sense of branding and brand image and all that.
Right.
I think video is the answer for that. That's why I love these guys. And I'm not trying to give a plug to Viral, but I am, because I just love their product. I think they have nailed a piece of the business that's so obvious and no one's seen.
Right.
It's exciting. So now we're going to talk about what you want to talk about, which is your company, because it's also exciting. And you're doing some things there that have enormous reach and potential if they come to pass. And
I appreciate that.
You're nipping at the edges of artificial intelligence. I'm not sure it's totally there, but you're certainly nipping at the edges of it. You're coming in with new ideas and concepts and ways of communicating. What you're doing with different apps, as an example, and messaging, I think is really innovative. And why don't you, James, just talk a little bit about your vision of what you have and what it's going to be and where it's going to go.
Sure. And just to touch on Viral a little bit is if you look at the way that they package up their service, it's a bundle of specific things that they're going to accomplish for a business, right? And there's so many different things that they can do, but there are some core capabilities that will lead to the most amount of success. And again, I think that the thought process is, that with a lot of what I'm doing, which is, fundamentally, I provide a sourcing support system, a service, an infrastructure that's tracked and backed up by data to support pretty much any size company. Right now, I'm supporting PetSmart's in a good bulk of their corporate operations, so professional roles, supporting about 6 or 7 different recruiters on site. And what I'm bringing to the table is no different than what Viral is doing, for yourself and for other businesses. Is I'm bundling up a specific set of activities that they can rely on, that they get a service on a consistent basis. Now, behind the scenes, it's a lot more complex than that, right? There's an assortment of process and design and tools and human labor that I'm packaging up in order to deliver the output. And so I've been thinking a lot about the breakdown, of what people want and how to get it. And I think that the upcoming products, and I have this master plan, which if you Google the things I'm working on, it'll probably confuse you. I'm not the best at articulating the things that I'm doing, but what I am getting better at is working in sequence. And there are certain things that are being worked on now, which are a building block to the future. And the first part of that is to capture a place where people can platform themselves. People, the tool that I'm talking about is something that's coming out called Sourcing Talent Cloud. And it's basically, like you mentioned, an Elance or an Upwork for HR, recruiting, and sourcing. If you have been operating in this industry over the last 15, 20, 30 years, you could literally tag yourself with specific categories of work that you've done, different outcomes that you've accomplished, and build a profile for yourself, much like you would do on LinkedIn. And this product will allow you to bid on different opportunities that align to those categories that you've worked in, and opportunities will be brought to you as well. And so my immediate goal is to just create a landing space for our type of people initially. It doesn't really exist. I think LinkedIn has certainly created an ecosystem for businesses all around, and they're trying to take over the function of recruiting. And that leaves a wide gap for professionals like ourselves that have built a career in what we're talking about here. So the immediate thing is a marketplace for people like ourselves in HR, sourcing and recruiting to come together and shine through the work that they can do.
You really, in a way, to me, whereas I'm looking at LinkedIn as a linear model, you're kind of a holistic, if that makes sense.
Right.
And what you're doing is in just 1 and 2, it's 120 to 60, it's all over the place. It's kind of an octopus, I think, of knowledge, one way to look at it perhaps. But it's really exciting because if it comes to pass, and I think you have every opportunity to do that in the economy we have today and what's happening with the competitors in the marketplace, you have a grand opportunity. You've got a lot of momentum and inertia with what you're doing with the different messaging products. So as that comes to pass, where do you see the company down the road? Do you see them as a partner to corporate America? Do you see them as a resource for corporate America, or a piece of their business you're selling to them? How do you see the company evolving? What's it going to do?
I think, phase 1 is really to create a community, and you mentioned the messaging thing, that's Slack has created an awesome tool for communities to be built, to gather, to communicate, to share knowledge, content, to look for jobs. It's a conversation pit. After that, it becomes, well, how do we accomplish our tasks in our world or in our job? And that's where sourcing talent comes in. It becomes the actual place that you can find the work that you're going to do. Now, all of this is foundational. And you asked kind of, what do I see coming into the horizon? You can't ignore the Autobots that are coming with the communication and artificial intelligence. I think that we're still in the rudimentary state. People still want to deal with people, right? I think that these bots are going to be a little bit more supportive in nature. The first place that I think it could really help is with candidate feedback and providing a means as an in-between person to communicate basic information that people need to function. In the future, putting bots aside, I think that you have there's a good shot for VR and augmented reality to save a lot in travel costs. I think, honestly, that's the starting point, because when you think about VR, the thing that comes to my mind is if you have these marketplaces like LinkedIn or Sourcing Talent Cloud can do well, there's so many people that are engaging in the communities. Why not just strap on an Oculus and start interacting?
Polo glasses, or
it's the evolution of what we're doing right here, the Hangout. What if we could turn this into a 3D environment and interact, and we could leave or take our Hangout and literally just walk side by side and go get a digital cup of coffee or something like that, right?
I think we'll see that in your lifetime and Stephanie's lifetime. I'm not sure I'm going to see it in mine, but I think it's a very exciting concept. Very exciting.
Right. So if I may ask a question, I'd love to hear about your take on the baby boomer generation taking on these new technologies. And what do you think is the best way for baby boomer generation to get involved with one of these more innovative, scary technologies?
Thanks for the tough question. I love hardball questions, and it's fair to ask.
Right. I'm a New Yorker at heart.
You got it. Never lost those skills. I understand. I think if I look at this pyramid in population and demographics, and I look at the boomers at the top, and I look at the millennials at the bottom, and Gen X in the middle, I think as the boomer population ages and dies off, which will happens for some of us.
Not for a while.
Not holding on for a long time, but it's happening. Well, as it happens, I'm also finding a rigidity in that generation personally. I find few people in that generation, the boomers, that are necessarily comfortable doing this or comfortable looking beyond what they did last week to what they're going to do next month. And they get rigid in their concept, where that's to a lesser degree Gen X. I find millennials just wide open, and they're They're really, they're open to ideas and thoughts and different ways of doing business, and sure, they're entrepreneurial. I don't buy into the thing of them being selfish and spoiled. Some are, but I can show you a lot of boomers that are too. I discount that stuff.
Right.
I think the millennials as a category are not just tomorrow's business, but today's. And I think Gen X is a big opportunity, particularly in the recruitment space. Boomers are now, the average boomer is what, 55, 56 years old. So from a standpoint of what they're doing, they're kind of reaching their peaks in their careers or beyond. Right. And I know a lot of my boomer friends will take me to task for that, but tough. That's the way I see it. I see the millennials, though, is that's the hope of the world in the future. And I think that we're giving them real short change, typically, particularly as an industry, because I talk way often and too often to people, they're recruiters that have put things in boxes, because that's the way you deal with information and people. Right. And those boxes aren't necessarily fair ones. And so, to answer your question, between the three, if I'm recruiting today, and if I was actively recruiting, I'd focus on probably kind of that layer between the millennial and the Gen X. That'd be my turf. I'd live in and breathe in and die in, because I think that's the world of business. I think the boomer generation, it's not that they're passe. I know a lot of boomers that are viable and vital and all of that stuff. It really is. As a category, however, and you're asking about a category question, I think the millennials offer great promise. I think Gen X are there, and boomers are kind of slowly fading away.
Right. Well, and the reason I ask is I haven't met a boomer that enjoys to sit back and retire. I think just by the nature of, the work ethic of the generation, I feel like they're still working hard, and they're still, wanting to contribute and do something. And I feel like there's a mainstream population for the cookie cutter type of professional that a corporation is going to hire. Right. And so, that typically, society shows us that they're always going after the younger, cheaper talent, right? The ones that are hungrier, and the ones maybe that are closer to the newer technology to stay innovating. But this virtual thing, with the means to be able to do what you want to do without having
or be who you want to be.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think it opens up a whole channel if there's a way to kind of show the different generations. So I do also think that virtual reality, if the teaching mechanism behind these new technologies, if there's a method to onboard different categories, then I think that it's open game and open territory for everybody. It doesn't have to be just one category or the other. I think everybody can benefit from that. And I think that that's not something that our current structure of work can support. Right.
It's kind of interesting because it's pertinent to what we're talking about, James. In researching my next book, I've done 2 books. I got a third in motion. And I've now talked to probably, I'm going to say roughly 20 big billers. And big billers is a vague term. To me, it means a third-party recruiter who's billing $500,000 a year or greater.
Right.
And I talk about 25 of them. All of them, if I put them in some kind of a category, primarily guys, not that it's sexist, it's just that's the nature of who I talk to. I'd say the average age is probably young 50s, old 40s, 48 to 52 kind of a thing, age-wise. No specific industry. There's kind of a skewing towards technology, but it's really a broad scope. It covers the whole gamut.
Right.
But the way they work and what they do, those people that are successful, super successful recruiters, there's 2 ingredients that I constantly hear when I talk to them. Because I always ask people, as I'll ask you when we're done, what hints do you have or tips for a good recruiter that wants to become great? And without exception, every one of them, and I'm talking about people who billing went from about 500 a year to about 2.2 million. That category of people all say the same thing. Verbatim, they say, stay on the phone, build relationships. And I think that's true.
Right.
I think that's true. But as you do that, you're talking, that's really kind of a Gen X / boomer concept.
Right.
That doesn't mesh perhaps quite as well with the millennials or the younger Gen Xers.
It's a huge challenge, and it's a confusing topic about what works, what is most impactful, what is most meaningful, right? Do those things align? I'm not a social person by nature. I've trained myself to be this, but I'm the techie. You know, when I growing up, I had a group of computer nerd friends that I hung out in the libraries, and then I just happened to be decent at sports, so I had this whole crew of social animals, and so I'm kind of like a mix of those. But if I have enough time, I revert back to the anti-social person. So the relationship building aspect has been a real struggle for me, and I think you're right. I'm not going to answer the question right now, but I'm certainly going to support what you said just a second ago. And there are different behavior patterns, and I think that is what's most important. Is you have a goal, and you could take different paths to accomplish that goal. Now, dialing for dollars and making 50 phone calls every day, because that process is a numbers game, and you get on the phone and you start the rapport, and then you've built the cycle, and then you have your tickle dates and your follow-ups, and little by little you start layering a piece of engagement with somebody new. Now, that is the more traditional method, right? You have people that are still calling directories and digging around, and that's the way that my parents taught me how to do the business when I first started. And it wasn't easy, but it was effective. And now, I think there is a generational shift, and there is a preference to text. And, I think that there's a comfort. We're getting more and more comfortable with our computer screen and our camera here, with our mobile phone.
Sure. No question. The other thing, though, you have to think about this. As long as the perfect candidate exists who's not looking for the perfect job, there's going to be somebody that finds him, identifies him, and drags them kicking and screaming back to a client to get hired. And that person is going to be the recruiter that does the $1 million a year, because those are skills you just can't botize or textize or automate. So there'll always be a place for that. May not be a big segment, but it's going to be a small enough segment to be viable. And I think personally, as long as that condition exists, recruiting as a business will always exist. There's always going to be a need to find those that aren't being found not want to be found. They're happy and they're content, but they're perfect for some role and capacity and needed in some kind of a job. As long as that condition exists, recruiters will have a business.
Well, and I think that, sorry to interrupt you, you touch on a point too, is different people sponge up information in different ways, right? And some people are visual people. Other people are auditory. And I think that factors into things as well. And maybe it could be a generational thing again. It could, it's not.
It's actually called NeuroLinguistic Programming, founded by a couple of guys in Santa Cruz, Binder and Grinder. The concept is viable, and it's how people process information. Auditorily is one way, visually is another way, kinesthetically is a third. And it's how you identify those patterns in people. And if you can massage your message, you conform with those patterns and mesh with it, you can actually, I use the word manipulation in a positive construct, you can manipulate decisions.
Right. The more you understand about a person, the better you can adapt to making sure your message gets through and you're receiving your message, right? So there's a place for sure. I think it's going to stick around for a while.
Okay. Well, let me ask you that magic question. If you're going to advise a person, regardless of age or function, to move from good to great, what advice would you give them?
Ooh, it's a good question, and it's hard to simplify down to those two things. I think in our industry, execution is key, which can translate into a lot of different things. For instance, if you say you're going to do something, do it. I think that ties into, I'm going to agree with you, relationship building. I think relationship building and execution And there's a trickle down effect there. But if you have those values in the way that you operate, then you're going to attract referrals, you're going to attract talent, and people will respect you when you're interacting with them.
Excellent. Well, James, I have to tell you, it has been fun talking to you. You're a bright, savvy guy. You really are.
Oh, thank you.
Insights here that I love. And I followed your writings for a long time, and I've always been kind of intrigued to talk to you and meet you. And so this has been an opportunity for me, frankly. And I want to thank you.
The opportunity is mine.
And Stephanie, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We really did learn a lot today. I took some notes, so we've got some good stuff. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.